Good evening. My name's Jonathan Norman from the Major Projects Knowledge Hub, and I'm delighted to be interviewing Alexia Nalewaik, who is an auditor, author, and professor, and describes herself as a fearless seeker of learning and knowledge. Alexia, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Good, good. Let's start straight away with a simple question, which is, what is project performance audit, and when does it happen?
Project performance audit differs a bit from your traditional compliance or expenditure audit or financial audit in that it looks very specifically at three things. And those are economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. Mm-hmm. Basically, what you're evaluating is success and what it took to achieve that success, whether or not resources were used in an optimal way, or whether or not there was a reasonability in the way things were done. In that, it really depends very much on stakeholder definitions of success. So you need to know your stakeholders, know what stakeholder success is, and then take a look at how your organization or your project is performing against that. The timing of a performance audit I see very often is annual or at major milestones. But really, a performance audit can be conducted at any point in time, depending on what scope is desired.
Okay, so a stakeholder might say, I'm a bit worried that we're going off the rails here. Can we have a performance audit?
Exactly, yes. And the goal is not so much what you find in traditional audit culture, which is frequently reporting on exceptions, identifying mistake, and kind of the finger pointing and fault finding that goes with that. Instead, and it's also not really the use of what I'll say best practice checklist, did they do this, did they do that? That's really much more of a compliance audit. The focus here is really very much on success and what it takes for that organization or project to reach their end goals.
Okay. Yeah, you talked about the elements of project success, and do you want to expand a bit on those? What are they in terms of an audit, and how might you begin to expose them?
It varies the definition of success varies very much by the stakeholders. Some stakeholders care all about expenditures. Some stakeholders just are darn happy they have a new building or the software is coming out or what have you. And in the meantime, somebody else hates the paint color and just couldn't be satisfied no matter what. So there are, when you're dealing with a lot of different stakeholders, there's a lot to juggle in terms of how success is defined. So you need to look at the major elements. Very often that comes down to traditional management controls, cost, schedule, change. Very often success is closely tied to risk. So knowledge of risk and treatment of risk become very important in the review of the project. Also, planning elements, how well projects align with strategy, how well funding aligns with overall program and portfolio, certainly use of resources, things like this. And then there are special issues that can be addressed. So if you look at typical audit findings, not a performance audit, you might identify a gap between project scope and available funding. The project's too expensive, right? Mm-hmm. You might find that there have been calculations done incorrectly or charges that are unallowable that were paid for, materials purchased and not installed, this kind of thing, or yes, even just failure to obtain documentation and keep it. Yeah. Sort of simple controls type issues. But if you're talking about a performance audit, you're looking deeper. You're looking much more deeply into certain targeted areas. You may find that a group of projects have not considered synergies or availability to share resources between projects. There may be a disconnect between an organization's strategic plan and their capital plan. So two departments not playing well together. There could be overlaps or big gaps in available resources, and even organizational issues such as frequent turnover of staff, which speaks to generally a culture problem or a management problem. There could also be project procedures that are in duplicate or unnecessarily burdensome. So there could be an opportunity for streamlining there, which it gets to it's sort of efficiency question. So there's a lot going on in the performance audit that is it goes more deeply in specialist areas than a traditional audit, which is really sort of, I'll say, simpler.
Yes, yes, yeah. And it's interesting there because you were talking about really auditing across a suite of projects. So it might not be limited to a single project. It could be over a program or a suite of projects. In traditional audit, I've yet to come across an organization that welcomes a traditional project review or audit. Is that the case with performance audit? Is there de facto likely to be a kind of resistance? How do you, and if there is, how do you overcome this kind of us and them mentality?
So on day one of an audit, I am absolutely the most hated person in a room. And that really puts the burden upon me to try to overcome that and form relationships with the individuals and organization that I'm auditing. So even though we typically start off with a document request, people might not be too keen on providing documents without understanding the why behind it. A lot of that pushback that I get from an organization and project team members is overcome during the interview process, because during the interview I have an opportunity to begin to get to know them and to let them get to know me as an auditor. Have them understand that I understand their business. I'm not just some accountant that's come in and is going to point fingers. I'm really there to add value to the project. So I can ask questions like, what would make your job easier? Or if you could streamline procedures, what would you do? I know they often say that an auditor comes in, asks you the time, and then tells you. To some degree, we're still doing that, right? Because we're asking for information, we're processing it, and then we're giving it back. But we're giving it back with the idea that we can assist an organization in continuous improvement and creating a learning culture. Providing assurance to stakeholders. And so by empowering critical questioning and helping team members to ask the sort of questions that perhaps they normally can't to management without getting pushed back, really creates a nice little culture between the auditor and those being audited, with the understanding that there's going to be some benefit in this for not just the project and organization, but for them, and that we're not there to make waves, we're there to help them achieve success.
Yeah, I can understand that entirely, that you're, in some senses, you're giving a voice to the project team members in areas where they may not typically have a voice.
Yes, and frequently we are eliciting statements from them that they have already said to management or said to higher ups and weren't listened to.
Okay, yeah, very good, excellent. Projects are changing, both in terms of technology and in terms of the way people are working together, and probably for the better. So we're now in a world of alliancing and relationship based rather than transactional contracting, agile development, automation, AI. I wonder what effect all this is having on your role as a performance auditor and the performance audit. Is that changing things for the better? Is that making it very different? Where do you see this? Where do you see your profession going?
I think in any high functioning profession, change is a good thing.
Hmm.
We should not be static. We should be constantly learning, and we need to take advantage of the technology that's available to us. In fact, you mentioned alliance and relationship-based projects or contracts. Those actually are the very definition of performance, right? An alliance contract is all about transparency, leaving badges at the door, acting all like one team. And so what you're really trying to review there is performance. So these absolutely can be audited. In fact, I did audit an alliance project, and one takeaway from that was that 3 out of 4 of the partners were truly transparent, and one was not. So you can imagine who did not get their contract renewed.
Yes.
But they did not want to provide their data. They were still very much tied to two masters, one being the project and the other being their firm and their own profitability. It's very difficult in a true alliance project to leave all the badges at the door. In the end, you do report to your own company, you do report to two masters. So it's tough to make an alliance project work as smoothly as it should, but the goal is certainly quite noble. And let's compare sort of agile in traditional audit and agile in performance audit. Agile is seen sometimes to lack internal controls. It's much more about cross-functional behavior and less of a focus on documentation and processes. So what you end up auditing is truly performance and outcome. Delivering that end product, collaborating with customers, addressing risk, transaction integrity and QA/QC of the product with a special focus on efficiency. So that iteration in Agile, that repetitiveness creates a very logical audit and control checkpoint in which the audit team can constantly sort of monitor for success.
Right.
Now, in terms of automation and AI, certainly auditors have been using automation for over half a century because audit itself is a very data-dependent function. So by removing repetitive calculations from the human scope of work, we are then free to, away from the large volumes of data and able to look at this sort of softer, bigger picture. And the Internet of Things is allowing capture of so much data now that it's allowing us to actually reduce human error. AI can be a tool in audit, certainly. Predictive analytics and data mining are much better now than they were when I first started as an auditor. We can move now beyond just descriptive analytics, which is retroactive. It's reporting what has happened, to statistical probabilities and forecasting, looking for patterns in data and trying to optimize organizations. It also, as auditors, gives us something else to audit. If a client or an organization is using AI, then we get to delve into the nitty-gritty of quality and quantity of data, whether the data is what we really need to receive, whether we're dealing with garbage in, garbage out. We can do reality checks on data and look for sort of the ability to reproduce an outcome, and whether or not we have perhaps in our programming inadvertently built human biases into the way the system is functioning. So it becomes all about the audit of a system.
Mm-hmm.
And I am so enthusiastic. I'm sure you can tell, but
Yes.
it's fun stuff. Anything that enables me to grow as an auditor gets me a bit excited. So automation and AI are some of those tools that we can use, not just to further the audit profession, but also gives us something new to look at.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, I'm warming to the subject. I know I started started like most people, like, oh, audit, oh, and one of the things that intrigues me is this idea of value, which is something that performance audit seems to look at particularly, and that I think would reflect the fact that a lot of projects, and particularly major projects now, are putting a greater emphasis on non-financial values, on social value, on environmental value, on some of these other outputs and benefits from the project. And I guess those are the kinds of things that you might be able to tease out in a performance audit, is in terms of, are you genuinely generating these kinds of values?
Right. So always coming back to economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, we're now looking beyond just cost and schedule, but we're looking more towards outcomes, behavior, relationships, and integrity and logic.